When someone plays with you, manipulates you, deceives you, or toys with your emotions, what they believe they are doing is gaining control. They imagine themselves to be the master of the situation, pulling invisible strings while you dance unknowingly to their rhythm. But the truth is that this sense of power is only an illusion. It is temporary, fragile, and inevitably self-defeating. Because power that is rooted in dishonesty is like a house built on sand. It cannot endure when the storm arrives. What we often fail to see in the moment is that manipulation is always a form of weakness disguised as strength. When someone chooses to play games rather than be authentic, what they are really confessing is that they cannot face the truth of who they are or what they truly want. They hide behind performance, behind cleverness, behind half-truths and masks. It may impress for a while. It may even convince them that they have the upper hand. But the psyche knows. The deeper self, the quiet part of the soul that is always watching, recognizes the falseness of the game being played. And no one can escape the truth within themselves for very long. Think of it like a shadow play. On the surface, everything seems to move as they desire, but behind the light and the screen, there is nothing substantial. When you play someone, you may gain attention, control, or a fleeting sense of superiority. But these are shallow rewards. They do not nourish the heart. They do not build meaning. They only create a hollowness that demands to be filled again and again. And the tragedy is that the more you rely on manipulation, the more you starve yourself of the very thing you crave most, genuine connection. There is a paradox here. The manipulator believes that by deceiving another, they elevate themselves. But in reality, they reduce themselves because they have traded authenticity for pretense. Every false gesture, every dishonest word, every carefully orchestrated move designed to play another human being. These are little betrayals, not only of the one deceived, but of the self. And betrayal of the self is the most dangerous kind because it leaves you fragmented, unable to stand in wholeness, unable to experience life without distortion. It is important to understand that deception is never neutral. It carries a cost, even if it isn't visible right away. The one who plays you may smile, may laugh, may walk away thinking they have won. But deep in the recesses of their consciousness, they have planted a seed of unease. And that seed will grow. It will grow into guilt, into emptiness, into loneliness that no amount of distraction can truly silence. That is why those who manipulate others often find themselves restless, always searching, never satisfied. Because what they sought to gain through false power was something that can only be found through truth. This is not a moral argument in the sense of punishment and reward. It is a description of reality. Life itself enforces these consequences. You cannot sow dishonesty and reap peace. You cannot build connection on games and expect it to last. The structure collapses because the foundation was never real. And in the silence that follows, the manipulator finds themselves alone, confronted not by the person they played, but by the emptiness they created within themselves. There's something profoundly ironic about this. To play another person, to treat them as an object rather than a being, is to reduce yourself into something smaller than you could have been. And while the victim of manipulation may suffer, they can heal, they can rebuild, they can grow stronger from the experience. But the one who played is left with a far deeper wound, the realization, often delayed, that they have been living falsely, and And that falseness has stripped them of meaning. So when we say, she played you, now she pays in silence, what we're really pointing to is this universal law: false power collapses while truth endures. The silence that follows the game is not just absence, not just the quiet after drama. It is the sound of reality reasserting itself. And reality cannot be manipulated forever. You see, the human soul is not built to thrive on deception. It is built for truth, for honesty, for genuine connection. To step away from that, even momentarily, is to step away from your own humanity. And to live outside your humanity is to invite silence. The silence of isolation, of regret, of a life that has lost its depth. So if you've been played, understand this: you may feel the sting of betrayal, but the deeper cost is not yours to carry. It belongs to the one who chose to build their sense of power on sand. And in time, the silence they face will become louder than any words could ever be. False power collapses. Truth is what remains. You cannot escape the psychological consequences of your actions. That is the remarkable, and at times, the frightening thing about being human. We imagine that we can act in secrecy, that if no one else knows what we've done, it somehow remains hidden. But there is no true secrecy from the self. Somewhere deep inside, the psyche keeps a record. It registers dishonesty, cruelty, manipulation, betrayal, even when the conscious mind tries to dismiss it or cover it up with justifications. And the price is always paid, not in the currency of public exposure, but in the far heavier weight of inner disquiet. When she played you, she might have walked away smiling, believing she had outsmarted you. But in that very act, she also planted something in herself. Because you cannot engage in deceit without creating an internal split. One part of the self knows the truth, the other tries to suppress it. That tension becomes a fracture, and the longer it remains unacknowledged, the deeper the fracture grows. We call it guilt sometimes, but it is more subtle than guilt. It is a quiet unrest, a loss of inner harmony, an inability to feel at peace within one's own skin. What we often fail to recognize is that our minds are not mechanical. They are not cold machines. They are living, sensitive systems woven out of memory, emotion, and meaning. When you wound someone else through deception, you simultaneously wound your own psyche, because the psyche depends on integrity for wholeness. Without integrity, you are divided against yourself. And a divided self is never strong. It is fragile, restless, and anxious, even when it pretends otherwise. There is a reason why people who play games in relationships often end up in cycles of dissatisfaction. They move from one connection to another, searching for excitement, distraction, or validation. But they cannot sit quietly with themselves because silence brings them face to face with what they've done. And that silence is not empty. It is full of the voices they tried to drown out, the memories they tried to escape, the truths they tried to bury. So instead, they keep moving, keep searching, keep playing new games. Yet the consequences follow them like a shadow that lengthens no matter where they go. The irony here is that the human spirit always seeks wholeness, even when we actively resist it. If you act dishonestly, some part of you longs for reconciliation. If you betray someone's trust, some part of you aches for forgiveness. If you hurt another, some part of you hungers to make it right. But when you suppress that part, when you deny it, the hunger doesn't go away. It transforms into unease, into restlessness, into that feeling of never being at home in your own life. That is the inescapable law. To harm another is to also harm yourself. Consider how the body reacts to poison. You might ingest it without immediate effect, but over time it spreads, disrupting the entire system. The psyche works in the same way. Betrayal and dishonesty act like toxins. At first, they might even feel thrilling, as though you've gained an advantage. But slowly, imperceptibly, they corrode the inner world. Trust in oneself diminishes. Joy becomes harder to access. Relationships lose their depth because the very thing that makes intimacy possible, authenticity, has been compromised. What is so striking about this is that life doesn't punish us externally for these things in some grand, dramatic way. More often, the punishment is silence. The silence of lying awake at night and sensing a gnawing emptiness. The silence of realizing that even when surrounded by people, you feel profoundly alone. The silence of having all the distractions in the world, but finding none of them satisfying. That silence is the psyche's way of demanding that we confront what we would rather ignore. And so, when she played you, the consequence wasn't only that she risked losing you. The deeper consequence is that she risked losing herself, because the self is not a possession. It is a delicate balance of honesty, integrity, and alignment with truth. When that balance is broken, you are forced to live in a fractured state. And no matter how loud the laughter, how convincing the performance, how carefully crafted the mask, silence always returns, whispering what you don't want to hear. You cannot escape yourself. This is why emotional consequences are inescapable. They are built into the very fabric of consciousness. Just as you cannot defy gravity without falling, you cannot defy truth without fracture. And when that fracture becomes unbearable, silence is the teacher that steps in. Silence strips away the noise, the excuses, the distractions, leaving only the raw awareness of what has been done. So if you find yourself played, deceived, or betrayed, remember this: you may feel the sting of loss, but the deeper weight lies not with you. It lies with the one who created the fracture within themselves. And while you can heal and rebuild, they must sit with that silence, a silence that cannot be bought, bargained with, or escaped. The universe does not forget. The psyche does not forget. And the heart always keeps the score. Punishment does not always come with fire and thunder. More often than not, it comes quietly. It comes in the form of absence, no voice to reassure you, no presence to affirm you, no connection to remind you that you are still significant. That is the strange nature of life. Its deepest lessons are not always dramatic, but subtle, whispering themselves into our experience through silence. And that silence, for someone who has played games and betrayed trust, becomes the most unbearable punishment of all. We tend to imagine that accountability looks like confrontation. We think of raised voices, of arguments, of being called out publicly. Yet, in truth, the most profound accountability is often invisible. It happens within the mind. It happens in that quiet space where there is no one left to distract you from yourself. When someone loses the connection they once had, not because of chance, but because of their own choices, they suddenly find themselves surrounded by this kind of silence. And the silence becomes a mirror, one they cannot escape. It's fascinating to realize that silence does not merely represent absence. It is not simply nothing. It has its own weight, its own presence. In silence, everything becomes sharper. The mind begins to echo with memories, with possibilities of what could have been, with questions that cannot easily be pushed aside. For someone who once believed they held all the power, this is profoundly unsettling, because silence cannot be manipulated. It does not argue, it does not flatter, it does not bend. It simply reflects back the truth of the choices you've made. This is why so many people cannot bear silence. They fill their days with noise, with entertainment, with endless conversation, with anything that will drown out the voice of conscience. But noise is temporary, and distractions always fade. When the crowd leaves, when the phone is put down, when the night falls, and there is no one left to talk to, silence returns. And in that stillness, the weight of one's actions becomes undeniable. Think of it like being in a vast empty room with no furniture, no art, nothing to occupy the eye. At first it may feel spacious, freeing even, but stay long enough, and the emptiness begins to press down on you. Every sound you make echoes back. Every movement reminds you of the void. That is the psychological state of the person who has played another, only to be left without the connection they once toyed with. They discover that silence magnifies regret. It magnifies loss. And in that magnification, they are forced to confront what they denied, the value of what they had, and the reality of what they squandered. This is the silent form of justice that life delivers. It does not shout, it does not accuse, but it lingers. And in its lingering, it teaches. The absence of your voice, your presence, your warmth becomes the very evidence of what they destroyed. And no matter how they try to justify their actions, silence strips away the illusions. Because you cannot charm silence. You cannot deceive it. You cannot manipulate it into telling you what you want to hear. It simply sits there, immutable, and in that immutability it delivers its verdict. Now, what makes this so powerful is that it operates beyond the realm of conscious choice. A person may not want to feel regret, may try to bury it beneath pride or arrogance, but silence has a way of seeping through the cracks. It invades the spaces between words. It fills the gaps between activities until it becomes inescapable. This is why someone who has played games eventually pays, not through outward punishment, but through the inner reality that silence imposes. What they once laughed at now replays in their mind, not as comedy but as tragedy. The moments they dismissed now come back to haunt them. And the silence, far from being emptied, becomes crowded with reminders of what they once had and can no longer reach. That is the nature of accountability. It does not always need a courtroom, a confrontation, or a dramatic collapse. Sometimes it is simply the unbearable awareness that arises when there is nothing left to distract you from yourself. So when you are tempted to think that someone got away with playing you, remember this: they cannot escape silence. They cannot outrun their own mind. They cannot hide forever from the mirror that returns to them every night when the distractions fade. And that is often a far greater punishment than anything external, because external punishments end, but the silence of conscience persists as long as the truth is denied. In the end, silence is not emptiness. It is truth echoing back, and truth always has the last word. Regret is one of the most haunting experiences of being human. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or loud proclamations. It creeps in quietly, often in moments when we least expect it. You can be walking down the street, laughing with friends, or lying in bed at night when suddenly a memory surfaces, not in the form of nostalgia, but in the form of a wound. And that's the thing about regret. It isn't just the memory of the past. It is the recognition of what could have been. It's the mind replaying the film of your life and pausing on the moments where things went wrong, whispering to you, it didn't have to be this way. When she played you, she might have felt clever, even powerful, in the moment. But memory has a way of reshaping those illusions. Because when the performance ends and the laughter fades, the truth stands naked. And the truth is that what was once vibrant and alive has been lost. Regret is not just about losing what you had, it's about realizing the value of it only after it has slipped through your hands. That is its cruelty. It grants clarity, but always too late. What makes regret so heavy is its silence. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention the way anger or grief does. It sits quietly in the background, but it colors everything. A new relationship, a new experience, even moments of happiness. Regret has a way of slipping in and reminding you of what you destroyed. And here's the deeper point: regret isn't punishment imposed by another, it is the psyche punishing itself. It is life reminding you that actions cannot be undone, that choices carry weight, and that betrayal comes with a cost far heavier than pride can cover. We often think of memory as a neutral storehouse, simply cataloging events. But memory is active, alive, constantly reshaping our experience of the present. When regret takes root, memory is no longer a simple record. It becomes a teacher, though a harsh one. It replays not to torment for the sake of torment, but to force acknowledgement. To say, you thought you were gaining something when you deceived, but what you really gained was loss. What's so striking is that regret doesn't need an audience. She doesn't need to confess it out loud for it to exist. Even if she maintains the mask of strength, the silence of regret will always find her when the world grows quiet. Because the mind doesn't forget. It carries its history like echoes in a canyon. Every word, every action, bouncing back again and again until you are forced to listen. And the longer it goes unacknowledged, the louder it grows. This is why regret is so inescapable. It binds the past to the present. She may move forward, find new people, chase new experiences, but the comparison is always there. The mind measures the new against the old, and when the old carried a depth of authenticity that the new cannot replicate, regret sharpens. It becomes a lens through which everything is seen. And while she may try to suppress it, suppression is never resolution. It only deepens the fracture within. You see, regret is not about punishment from the outside world. It is about alignment with truth. The human psyche cannot thrive in dishonesty. When actions break integrity, the self becomes divided. One part insists it was the right choice. The other knows it was wrong. That division produces the dissonance we call regret. And unless one is willing to confront the truth, regret does not fade with time, it festers. It is also important to notice that regret has a strange way of humanizing us. It strips away arrogance. It erodes illusions of invulnerability. And it humbles even the proudest person. Because you can pretend you are in control of many things. Your image, your words, your story. But you cannot control the haunting of memory. You cannot dictate when regret will surface or how deeply it will sting. It arises precisely because it is beyond manipulation. And in that, it serves as a profound form of justice. So when she pays in silence, regret is part of that silence. It fills the space with echoes of what she destroyed, with memories that refuse to stay buried. And though she may not admit it, the weight grows heavier with time. Because time doesn't heal all wounds. It exposes the depth of those that were self-inflicted. If you have ever been on the receiving end of betrayal, it is tempting to wish for revenge. to want visible consequences. But understand that life itself delivers a consequence far more enduring, the silent replay of regret. And while you may heal and move forward, she must live with the endless reminders of what could have been if only she had chosen truth. Regret is the shadow that never leaves. And when it settles, it whispers the same sentence over and over again. You cannot undo what you have done. Every action we take ripples outward, shaping not only the world around us, but also the world within us. This is what I mean when I speak of the law of reciprocity in relationships. It is not a mystical rule handed down by the universe. It is a simple reality of cause and effect woven into the fabric of human connection. When you give love, respect, and honesty, these qualities do not vanish into the void. They circle back to you, often magnified, because relationships are reciprocal systems. They are mirrors reflecting back what you put in. And when you give deception, betrayal, or manipulation, that too returns. Not in the same form, but in the emptiness, the loneliness, the loss of trust that inevitably follows. There is a profound symmetry in human interactions. If you approach another person with sincerity, you open the possibility of real intimacy. If you approach them with games and manipulation, you ensure that intimacy can never truly form. What you put out is what you get back, though not always immediately. There is often a delay, a gap, and it is in that gap that many people are fooled into thinking they can cheat the system. They imagine that because there are no immediate consequences, there will be no consequences at all. But just as planting a seed does not yield fruit overnight, the seeds of dishonesty take time to bear fruit. And when they do, the harvest is bitter. Think about trust. Trust is not given once and for all. It is continually built, like a bridge that grows stronger each time weight passes over it without collapse. When you invest honesty into a relationship, you strengthen that bridge, making it possible to carry more weight to handle greater challenges. But when you introduce lies, betrayal, or manipulation, you weaken the bridge. And though it may not collapse instantly, each deception adds cracks until one day the weight of reality is too much and the bridge falls. And the tragedy is that once it has collapsed, rebuilding is not only difficult, it is often impossible. This is why manipulation is always self-defeating. On the surface, it may look like control. But beneath the surface, it is sabotage not only of the relationship, but of the manipulator themselves. Because the law of reciprocity doesn't stop at the external. It governs the inner world as well. When you give dishonesty, you teach your own psyche to distrust itself. When you give betrayal, you fragment your own soul. When you use others, you reduce your capacity for genuine connection, which is the very thing your heart craves. The person who plays games in relationships imagines they have gained something. Maybe attention, maybe temporary validation, maybe the thrill of control. But life is not fooled. What they have truly gained is emptiness. Because reciprocity ensures that the energy you send out must return. And if what you send out is falseness, then falseness becomes your reality. And this is the real punishment. Not that others will reject you, but that you will never be able to escape the hollowness you have created inside yourself. It is important to see this law not as a curse, but as guidance. It shows us how to live in alignment with what is real. If you want connection, give connection. If you want love, give love. If you want honesty, be honest. Because what you withhold from others is ultimately what you withhold from yourself. The manipulator, The betrayer, the one who plays with others' hearts. They imagine they are taking something away from the other, but in reality, they are starving themselves of the very nourishment that makes life worth living. When you look closely, you see that the law of reciprocity is not just about fairness, it is about survival of the spirit. A human being cannot thrive in falseness. The soul withers when it is forced to live in contradiction to truth. And so the consequence of playing someone is not just losing them, it is losing yourself. Because in relationships, you are always dealing with mirrors. What you send out comes back, and if you send out deception, the mirror will eventually show you nothing but the emptiness of your own dishonesty. So when she played you, what she really played was herself. She thought she could bend the rules, manipulate the exchange, and walk away victorious. But the law of reciprocity doesn't bend. It doesn't forget. And now, in the silence that follows, she faces the truth that what she gave is what she has received. Emptiness in return for emptiness. Silence in return for dishonesty. Regret in return for betrayal. The lesson, then, is clear. Relationships are not games to be won, they are reflections to be honored. You cannot sow falsehood and reap truth. You cannot give betrayal and expect love. The universe of human connection doesn't work that way, and it never will. What you give is what you live. Silence is not just the absence of sound, it is the presence of truth. When words fade and distractions fall away, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects back to us the reality we have tried to escape, the choices we have made, and the consequences we cannot avoid. And this is where the weight of her actions comes to rest. When she played you, when she chose manipulation over authenticity, she may have thought she was clever. She may have even believed she had won. But silence is patient, and it always arrives in the end. It is in that stillness, when there is no one left to reassure her, that she begins to see herself without disguise. What makes silence so powerful is that it strips away illusions. You can lie to others. You can even lie to yourself for a while. But silence doesn't play along. It doesn't comfort or flatter. It simply holds up a mirror, and in that reflection, you are faced with the unvarnished truth of your own being. For someone who has deceived, who has broken trust, who has built their sense of power on falsehood, this becomes unbearable. Because in silence, the mask falls. And what is revealed is not triumph, but emptiness. This is why many people run from silence. They surround themselves with noise, with endless activity, with relationships that are shallow but distracting. They scroll, they drink, they talk, they keep moving. Anything to avoid sitting still. Because sitting still means facing the echo of the choices they made. And in the case of someone who has played with another's heart, silence becomes the courtroom where judgment is passed, not by another person, but by their own soul. It's important to understand that this isn't punishment in the ordinary sense. It is simply how life works. Silence is neutral, it doesn't take sides. But because it reveals truth, it feels like punishment to the one who has been living falsely. To sit in silence is to see clearly, and clarity is painful when it illuminates the damage you have caused. That is why she pays in silence, not because someone forced her to, not because you demanded it, but because silence cannot be escaped. It is always there, waiting at the edges of experience, ready to return when the noise dies down. And what does silence reveal? It reveals the cost of her choices. It shows her that what she thought was control was actually self-betrayal. It shows her that what she dismissed as unimportant was, in truth, deeply valuable. It shows her the hollowness that comes when authenticity is traded for games. And the longer she avoids it, the heavier it grows. Because silence doesn't fade, it accumulates. Each moment of avoidance only makes the eventual confrontation more overwhelming. There is also a strange compassion hidden in this process. Silence does not condemn. It simply reflects. It doesn't shout. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't dramatize. It just places the truth before you without commentary and leaves you to deal with it. In that sense, silence offers a chance for transformation. If she chooses to face it honestly, to let the reflection teach her, she could grow, she could change, she could rebuild herself in alignment with truth. But if she resists, if she continues to run, then silence becomes a prison. Because the more you resist truth, the more trapped you are by it. For you, the one who was played, it's important to recognize this dynamic. You don't need to seek revenge. You don't need to force her to see the truth. And you don't need to spend your life proving your worth. Life itself, through the simple, unavoidable presence of silence, will deliver the lesson. And that is often a far greater teacher than anything you could say or do. So when you think of her sitting in the silence of her own choices, understand that it is not your burden to carry. You are free to move forward, free to rebuild, free to create a life rooted in truth and authenticity. But she must face the silence she created. She must sit with the reflection of her actions. And in that silence, she will discover that the games she played were never against you. They were always against herself. Silence, in the end, is the great equalizer. It reveals who we are when there is nothing left to hide behind. And for those who choose falseness, it is not a gentle companion, but a relentless mirror. The mask falls, the noise fades, and only truth remains.